A warm welcome to this BFI at Home event celebrating the South Asian Heritage Month. This runs from the 19th of July to the 17th of August 2021. I'm Ashanti Omkar. I'm your host for today. I'm a film critic, a broadcaster, strategist, and programmer at the London Indian Film Festival. I work with the BBC, etc., etc. I'm welcoming our fantastic panelists, actually, very lucky to have them both here. We have the lead, the literary lead of the South Asian Heritage Month and the South Asian Writers founder, Natasha Junejo. Hi. And we have very well-known academic here, the Professor of Cultural Studies, Rajinder Dudrah. He's been doing this for a very long time, and we're very happy to have you here with us today. Hi.
Hello.
Now we're going to be having a lovely free-flowing discussion around our thoughts, ideas, and perspectives of these three very carefully curated British Asian films. The first being I'm British But. It's directed by Gurinder Chadha herself from 1989. Then we have Sixth Happiness by Waris Hussein from 1997, and we have Mogul Mowgli, very new, that's by Bassam Tariq, whom we're all waiting because he's in talks to direct the next Blade movie, and that's from 2020. Now, very excited to show you this clip from I'm British But by Gurinder Chadha, but I must give you a trigger warning because there are some disturbing scenes, but I wanted you to get a sense of this film. So let's see the clip.
So now you know what I'm about. I couldn't hear you calling, I could hear you shouting, begging for more calls, there ain't no mercy, just dishing it out. I know you all thirsty, you think you say you earn, but you're having fun, wondering where it's coming from. You know it's number one, moving your body and tapping your toes, clapping your hands and grooving your soul. It's raw, it's fresh, call it super new. It's a cool sharp drop that's reaching you, that's reaching the streets and across the nation. Everybody's talking about my funky Asian, funky Asian, funky, 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 funky Asian. We are breaking out, Bangla lovers. We are breaking out, Bangla lovers. We want the world to know our mission. We want the world to know we are breaking out, Bangla lovers. We are breaking out, Bangla lovers.
Well, that clip started off very harrowing, but it ended with such joy. All those guys from that fantastic Bhangra band in Southall having samosas, walking into the Broadway. It just kind of sets up that film so beautifully. 1989, Gurinder Chadha, very early work before she became huge with films like Bend It Like Beckham. And this is a documentary that she made, and it obviously meant a lot to her as somebody who moved to England from Africa. And being a British Asian in the 80s, this is what she has created with this. It's called I'm British But. It's on the BFI player. Now, there are so many themes in this I'd love to discuss with Natasha and Rajinder. Let's kind of start with this idea of identity, because for me, if someone asks me, I'll say I'm British, Asian, Tamil, where possible. And I might have to explain that. I might have to say, what does Tamil mean? And all of us have those little bits of identity that we then draw from an overall Eurasian. Let's start with Natasha, because you've created this month actually to celebrate this idea, and kudos to you, because we've been waiting for something like this.
Oh, bless you. That's very kind of you to say. It's a strange thing, isn't it? And watching this short film, it resonated a great deal with me, and a great deal with the work that we're doing as well, because this idea of identity, I think Asianness, Asian proper, was this homogenous monolith, wasn't it, for the longest time? And it was very much other. It was just a big chocolate block over here. And it's really, and like you say, I would have described myself as British Asian, and now it becomes more granular, doesn't it? And now I say half Punjabi, half Sindhi. My parents are from Pakistan, but they were a cross-cultural marriage. And the Sindhi element is important as well, because Sindh sits across two countries, and so many different strands that knit together to form your identity. And that's just the Asian side of you. And then the way that intersects with being a third culture kid, when you are raised in a culture that is British, but your parents who've migrated over to England and taken this time capsule of culture from the country that they have migrated over from. But if they were to move back to India or Pakistan, that country and their culture has moved on as well. So we are all living in this bizarre, we're all in this little holding pattern of what is identity, and do we need time travel to understand it, really? And it's this wonderful dialogue that I think people are feeling quite free and able to explore fully now. So it was actually such a treat to be able to watch this and see the different viewpoints of young people in the 80s and how they felt about it at that time, and see all the differing perspectives. It was really extraordinary.
Totally agree. Especially, I was so interested to see that she had captured people from the UK, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, and all of them had their own view of that as well. They didn't say we were British. Some of them were saying, I'm actually Scottish Pakistani, Rajinder, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. It's a lovely film, not least because I've seen it many times, and it takes me back to my days of my youth. So I am giving my age away. I was a teenager, I was at school, and I was organising bungalow events and bungalow discos, or bungalow gigs as they were called back in the day in school. So for me, it was partly a revelation. It was partly a moment in time. It captures the 80s again for us. It captures the heydays of the British Bhangra scene, and particularly the live British Bhangra scene. So we get to hear some fantastic music. We get to see some outrageous fashion, but fashion of the time, those white trousers, some wonderful colours. So we see here a mixing of cultures. Not only do we see a British Asian formation of cultures, which is British, which is Asian, which is North African, which is also rap and pop, but also we see Bollywood as well. And that's where the white trousers comes in, by the way, a homage back to the Bollywood stars, the Amitabh Bachchans and so forth from the 70s and 80s. But it was also interesting because it's a documentary. And what's interesting is that notion of Gurinder Chadha really trying out her craft and trying out her media practice, which she then really carries on. And even if you think about some of her mainstream films like Bend It Like Beckham, they are almost like meditations on what it means to be a woman playing football, what it means to be a British Asian woman playing football. So, it's that kind of observation of life, observation of scene, and Southall again features quite prominently in Bend It Like Beckham as well. But this film is really interesting and telling because it takes a genre of popular music, and let's not forget at that time, in the mid to late 80s, coming out of the 70s, a lot of our cultures as Asian was derided, particularly in the mainstream, particularly by mainstream white culture, but also even by Asian and other kids who didn't know them, because partly there was this notion of, what is this? And these strange sounds, these funny sounds, these lurid colors, these strange curries. And now, of course, curry is really fashionable. So even at that time, there was a debate about being caught between two cultures. And it's interesting that Natasha mentions three cultures, but at that time, the debate wasn't as sophisticated as that. It was, are you British or are you Asian? East or West, and never the twain shall meet. So that was a wonderful meditation on showing how through this popular music genre, one which had been derided in the mainstream or was very little known about, this, for those that partook in it, it was an outlet, it was an escape, and it was a way in which people could forge and make their identities. And then it takes us from the story to Bhangra, to even more fusion music, where we have Joy Bangla and we have remix culture. And then that really takes us into the cusp of the 90s, where these things even mixed up almost pre-intersectionality in the way that Natasha was talking about.
I mean, so true. For me, I was surprised she packed all of that into such a short film, because honestly, so much came out of it for me. You know, everything from me remembering that, yeah, my mom used to have a beehive and bell bottoms. You know, we used to look at Western culture and we would copy it. We were colonized. So it always was that we were looking to the West, and reclaiming that is something that I know Natasha has been working very hard on, saying that, look, this is what South Asia is all about. And that was interesting in the documentary, actually, because you know, for me, I feel like in today's Brexit Britain, this documentary that was made in the 80s still rings so true. What do you think of that, Natasha? Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I agree completely. And to your point there as well, what I found most difficult when I was watching it was, and it was really skillful as well, was the way that these pockets of where people were finding belonging, there was such harsh juxtaposition of, but this is the bloody and real history of what has happened. And then there were people, there was somebody that was talking about, I think they made a home in Wales, and the father was, I think they'd invested in agriculture, and he was, out of all of them, I'd made notes and I was like, you are the most British brown person I've ever seen in my life. And it, to their credit. And I think the key with that person was their identity was so rooted in Britishness, and he so fully and wholly and completely believed in his Britishness, and then spoke about the family going away for a weekend, and everything had been leveled to the ground and burnt and destroyed. And they got a phone call and everything had gone, and they didn't know who it was, but it was that revocation of belonging that even when you reconcile what your identity and where you think you might belong and where home might be, that it could be taken from you at a moment's notice. And that's post-colonial legacy, isn't it? And so the idea, when I was watching it, the idea of belonging to me, given our history, given what has happened to us, and given what we have experienced intergenerationally, belonging seems to me to be less about a place and more about commonality and more about kinship that we find with each other, which is why through music, through culture, through food, through clothing, through art, I think that we resonate so strongly with one another. And that's what I loved about, again, when she's exploring these subcultures of fashion and music, that there is that's why I think it was paired so well with the destruction and the history and the horror, with all of these wonderful beautiful things that come out of it instinctively and creatively, because that's where our belonging lies. It's no longer physical.
Wow, powerfully said, Natasha. Thank you for that. I resonate with all of that. It's all about respecting other cultures and lives, but the world increasingly, it's not just Britain, the whole world seems to be having a problem with that at the moment. And we want films like this to be seen. Before we go into a clip of Sixth Happiness, which we're going to show, Rajinder, any thoughts for you about how, you know, you were there, you were on the scene when she made this documentary? You knew, you know, the Bradford brothers, Farooq and Haroon. You probably knew, you know, Color Freak, the Bhangra band. And any thoughts on how you feel about that evolution to now in 1 minute?
In 1 minute, oh yeah, oh yes, many a good time has had dancing to Color Freak and you know, all the other bands that are name checked in that documentary. But what was also interesting here is the important point that Natasha's alluded to, and that is the point about colonialism and the British Empire that brought us together both forcibly and also having to deal with that legacy. what happens when you go and colonize different parts of the world, and then people through choice, through exile, through refugee, say whatever it is, then arrive on your doorstep. How do we reconcile those notions of identity and the culture that comes with it? So it's no accident that the opening track to that is by DCS, Rule Britannia, and we can see Gurinder Chadha literally marking out British Film Institute's kind of, the names and saying, I'm British, but with her white pen marker. So it's this notion of intervention. It's this notion of inscribing oneself into a history that I'm still trying to work out. I'm not sure what it's about. And this is why the music partly punctuates that history for us, but also is putting together the pieces, that this isn't just a joyous, joy celebre, if you like. Of course that it is, but it's also a music that's been forged out of struggle. It's a music that's been forged out of entertainment, and it's a music that responds to certain histories. And that track from Kala Preet that we hear in the track is very much about being a foreigner, being a first generation immigrant, trying to make your way, trying to live that economic dream, but at what cost? And it comes at a certain cost. So it's not just popular culture for the sake of enjoyment, it's also popular culture, which is also educating and informative too.
Wow, absolutely, 100% agree with you on that. The music it's evolved over time, but to see those strong lyrics that they had written, and for people like me, I don't understand Punjabi, so having those actually put on the screen there really hit me very hard. And I have to say to everyone, if you've not seen this documentary, it's really worth watching, because this captures the immigrant experience for so many people, for so many generations actually, because this is going back. And this idea of getting, at one point he says, I want to get the white people to dance to our music because those beats can touch anybody. And I love that. I thought that's something that we want to do with our cinema. We wanted to cross over in many ways. And speaking of cinema, let's talk about this feature film that's on the BFI player. This is called Sixth Happiness. I had not seen it till a couple of days ago when we were going to talk about it on this panel. And before the days of the Intouchables, the French film, before the days of Margarita with a Straw, there was a film, there was a film back in 1997 about a young boy born with brittle bones. He's Parsi, and it's about how his family actually give him support, how they might kind of crumble around him, and how he finds his sexual awakening.
People are going to think you're really weird if you don't dance.
I don't think I can.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. So, now I can't move any more than you can. So, let's dance together.
Completely fascinated by this film. The performances were brilliant. There were some actors that we know very well, like Nina Wadia in it, and it was just great to see this film. Now let's talk about some of these ideas, because disability in South Asian communities is a tough one, whether it's hidden or whether it's seen disability. I myself struggle with endometriosis, etc., and people don't quite get it. It's quite difficult to communicate it. This film does it very well, and it did it so long ago. Let's go to Natasha. What would you like to say about this film?
I thought that initially, the way that what struck me first of all was, as soon as the film opened, when Britt was born, and his father came into the room with his mother, and he told her she was really brave, and she said, "What's brave about loving your own child?" It floored me, because it was something I never expected to hear out of a South Asian woman's mouth at that time, because of the attitudes and the because of the cultural attitudes to disability, and like you say, even invisible illnesses as well. And I have one as well, and people just they can't get their heads around struggle, and or they want to sort of pack it up and fold it away and put it in a cupboard, and it's just not something I think people know how to fit into polite conversation and familial and societal relationships and behaviors. And so this was so utterly refreshing, but then humanizing as well, because there was, and I don't think this is a spoiler in any way, but there was an instance where Brit was at his father's workplace, and then it was revealed that his father had never told anybody at work that he had a son at all. And so people just thought he was lost, and they didn't know why he was there, because the shame and the embarrassment and not wanting people to know that he had a child that was so disabled or unwell. So there was a realistic element there that reflected the culture and this layer of shame that people shroud themselves in. But I thought it was a really interesting interplay. The strength of his mother was incredible, I thought.
Absolutely. That character really surprised me, because I didn't see that coming. I think we've just not seen that kind of strong mother saying, I don't care what the doctor's saying to me about my child. This is my child. I will raise him, and I'll raise him really well. And I absolutely love that. Now, in terms of an academic perspective, Rajinder, what do you think of this film when you saw it? Were there lots of bits where you thought, wow, I've taught things like this in my classes, and they've brought it to life in this film?
This was 1997. This was pre-intersectionality, which is one of the buzzwords as part of EDI. This is a really refreshing film that does intersectionality in a really interesting way before we even started talking about intersectionality in the way that the feminists have been really doing for a long time. I think this is a wonderful film to really take in the classroom, and it's one I will certainly be revisiting again. But what's interesting also in terms of some of the themes and issues here is the comedy. It starts off quite light-hearted. The music is light-hearted, so you're not quite sure whether you're being laughed at. Are you laughing with the character? Are you main with the character Brit, who has this disability? There's moments where it also goes into black comedy as well. So it's also like, oh, is this having a kind of a critique on society? Is it having a critique on the family? And also, it does not shy away from looking at some of the taboo issues and the discrimination that Brit faces, both as a disabled person, but also a disabled person within his family. So he has this kind of a loving relationship with his mom, who's very protective and he's very strong, as Natasha said, but the father has a nice relationship with him, mostly at home, but outside, very indifferent. There's that loving relationship that he has with his sister. His extended family turns up, and people literally to his face are discriminating, which by today's standard, you would think, my God, someone punched somebody in the face, or you be quiet now, right now. But at that time, it was literally blatant, where people were talking about, is this a disease? Is he being punished? And, oh, well, and so all of this comes out in terms of how disability is not being dealt with, or has been badly dealt with within wider South Asian communities. And then coming back to the South Asian, the sexual awakening, that was lovely, because it's done, and I won't spoil this too much, but the sexual awakening happens in a lovely LGBT queer way. And when the mother realizes this, the mother who has been loving and protecting him, she actually calls her son, oh my God, are you a pervert? So from one extreme to the other, what it shows is, whilst the mother is caring and loving and maternal about her son, and rightly so, she yet hasn't been able to grasp, and partly because that's where society is at that time, to deal with, if you like, from disability to its intersectionality with race, and particularly with queer sexuality at the time, or gay sexuality. And so the film is layered and lovely. And if I just may very quickly, hats off to Waris Hussein here, the director. And because he was, let's remind us, and if we don't know this we need to watch them just for that, Doctor Who, the very first black and white Doctor Who, Waris Hussein was key in making and producing that with the key team and the female producers that made the very first black and white Doctor Who. So he's literally gone on a journey again, which is also about kind of character development, protagonist development, and he really has shown us his versatility as well.
Totally. I mean, a big kudos to him actually for making this film. And I hope a lot more people get to see this film. I'm gutted that I'd missed it at the time. And it's great that it's on BFI Play, and it's definitely worth a watch, because I was completely captivated. He's obviously a very, very good filmmaker, and his cast is amazing. The boy who plays Brit, he's actually so confident and just so wonderful when he comes onto screen that you can't stop watching him. Let's also, before we go on to our next film, which is Mogul Mowgli, I would like to just touch upon the fact that they're Persian. So they're Parsis, they're from the Persian Empire. They are settled in India. So they have a different viewpoint. In fact, they seem to be even more British than others who might be British Asian. They're Anglophiles, aren't they? Rajinder, any thoughts on that?
Yes, this is almost a kind of a satire on the bygone days of the British Empire and those Parsis or those Anglo-Indians who thought Britain was the best. And there's some wonderful scenes where literally the mother thinks she's like in an air raid shelter, or that the World War II is about to happen again, when there's an East-West Pakistan altercation with India. And so she's literally stocking up on her baked beans and literally out of a scene of kind of a post-war British kind of a comedy, or a kind of a social say. But also there's a critique here about British society and the legacy of colonialism. To what extent can we move on? To what extent are we holding on? And the character's name as well, that notion of him being Brit, is that also a kind of a lamentation or a meditation on the idea of the identity of not just Brit the character, but the legacy of Britain and its relationship to both Anglo-Indians and to India in its colonialism?
I completely resonate with that. And it was nice, also refreshing, I felt, was seeing a Parsi family, because we don't see a lot of that. We get our kind of Parsi fix from going to Dishoom, don't we, to eat, but we don't really get to see the culture very much. And this is a lovely thing. Any parting words, Natasha, on this film?
I know that the behavior of the family in terms of being Anglophiles was satirical, but I found it so frustrating and upsetting, and it made me so angry, because it is based on the behaviors of real people, and we all know somebody like that. And it just reminded me of people with Stockholm syndrome, who had been, occupied for years. And it's when you are subjugated to the point where you crave proximity to whiteness and you crave approval from your oppressor. And I know that it was meant to be funny, but I was just like, oh goodness me, there's actual people like this, and that's horrifying to think about. But I did find it hilarious when one of the ladies said that she only eats English food. And then they started singing all the wartime songs, and then they started getting excited about the war with Pakistan, and I was just, it was absolutely bananas. But I think that's the whole the tone and the pace of this film. It is delightfully chaotic, and it's just very, very satirical, and it's very light-hearted, and it was a joy to watch. But when we start to think about the history, and when we let the history in, it's quite tough, I think.
I agree. I think Sixth Happiness, it's one of those films that is a mirror on society. And like what Natasha said, I know people like that. I hate to admit it. I hate the fact that I've known people like that and seen them, and sometimes have to hang out with them. But the truth is it exists, and it is a mirror on society. And again, that segues us straight into Mogul Mowgli, which again showcases this mirror on society in many ways.
Yeah, I'll ask you where you're from. Now, where you really from? The question seems simple, but the answer's kind of long. Britons are on board, and I love a cup of tea and that. But where my genes are from, people don't really MC in that. Now, everybody, everywhere, want their country back. If you want me back to where I'm from, I need a map. No man's land, yeah, between trenches, no thing grows there. But it's fertilized by the brown bodies that fall for Britain in the war, so when I spit a poppy grows there. I find my own place in this business of Britishness. So stop trying to find a box for us. I'll make my own approach and fucking consent of us. Motherfucker, my blood and sweat's in us.
Director Bassam Tariq, I mentioned that he's in talks to direct Blade. We're all rooting for him because he's made this one film that just completely took over last year when it came out. Riz Ahmed has been championing a lot for diversity in cinema, for Islamic representation also, where it's a positive representation, because unfortunately a lot of the time what we see in cinema is, oh, this guy is going to play terrorist number 2, and that's what they will be. And Mogul Mowgli shows you, it shows that, look, this is a guy who's human. He is a guy called Zed. He's a British Pakistani rapper. He's based in New York, at the top of his game. And just before his European tour begins, he's diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. So again, disability is in this film. And returning to see his Pakistani family in London, he has obviously changed a lot in his time away and rediscovering those roots in many ways. And that question he asks, from get-go, where are you really from? And we saw that in the trailer. That is really, it's in some way, I mean, I love it when people ask me that question. I always throw them when I say, well, I was born in Sri Lanka, I grew up in Denmark, then we moved to Nigeria, and then when I was 12, we moved to London. And people are like, and that kind of stops them, and they're like, wow, okay, I don't quite know what else to say to this. She's given us this answer. But this is a question that I'm sure, Natasha, you and Rajinder must have been thrown this question. Rajinder, how have you dealt with that question, and how did you feel it linked with Mogul Mowgli as a film?
Well, let's take the title of the film, lovely, Mogul Mowgli. Yeah. And if you think about Mogul, as in the Mughal Empire, what's interesting is this is a very character-led film. It's deliberately filmed and the frames are cut off at the edges, so you literally have to focus in. There's some extreme close-ups about psychology, about interior, about the family and the domestic space, about the turmoil of the body when the body is in angst as well. And we almost can feel and see and hear through the music us going on that journey. And that journey takes us back to our Mughal era, particularly in Mughal South Asia, pre-partition India. Partition is a key theme in this film as part of colonialism. And also it then takes us to kind of modern urban in the diaspora as well, whether that's in New York or in London. Mowgli from the Jungle Book. When on Earth, and we've seen those representations, the Mowgli figure and the Jungle Book X, the kind of the Kipling-esque figures of us. And what he does is he brings these together and he almost collides them together. So he's almost going on this journey of finding himself, but he's also going through this journey of pain, of torture at times, and that's partly through the disability. It's also harrowing to watch in places, and it also mixes genre. So there's the genre of, if you like, the discovery. There's almost elements of the road trip of him being in cars, looking out the window, looking at parts of Wembley and wherever he is. There's also parts of horror as well. There's this wonderful motif of this figure. Is this some sort of Sufi figure? Is he a saint figure? Is it Dudrah Singh himself, who appears with this kind of bridegroom flowers? You look at it, you think pretty, but actually when he appears, he really startles and upsets you. So it's really, partly for me, it was a film that took us on this character-led journey, but a character-led journey which really takes us into the interiors of psychology, the interior spaces of the domestic space of a home, a British, Asian and British Pakistani home, but it also takes us to, whereas with I'm British, but we're talking about Bhangra, this really uses rap and kind of diasporic forms of rap, British rap, which are inflected through the Asian sound, the Asian identity. And I think that kind of also elevates it in a really interesting and very kind of in your face, punching you in your face, where we're really directly talking to the camera, which he does a number of times.
Wow, absolutely on point there, Rajinder. You've really dissected the film so beautifully, and we felt all those feelings while watching this. And I think that was the magic of this film, because Riz Ahmed is such a powerful performer, but he's also a musician. So a lot of us knew him as MC Riz. So for us, watching him taking on cinema in a great way is is very special. And again, I'm tying this back to Brexit Britain, where people want their country back. What does that really mean? You know, we're put in this box due to our skin color, but we are all very, the three of us here, very assimilated into wider Britain. Natasha, any thoughts on that?
I think it's an interesting thing, because I would have used the word assimilated up until quite recently, and now the idea of assimilation to me I find quite strange. I think because we are, as a country, quite ignorant about the truth, the complete picture of our own history. There are so many people that don't even realize that most of the South Asian people that we hear, or a lot of people that were part of the Commonwealth and colonized countries, all came here as citizens already. Yes. People don't know that. So they think, why are you here? Why are you in my country? Where did you come from? You look different from me. And it's like, well, you illegally occupied ours. We are citizens, so we came as citizens. But it's the ignorance. And so when the burden is then on you to walk through a fog of ignorance and then assimilate, I find that very unequal terms. And I find that to be quite ludicrous, in my opinion. So from this side of life, when I look back at it, assimilating is no longer something I'm particularly proud of. I find it quite strange, and I'd like to interrogate that a little more and examine why the burden is on you to assimilate at all, because what that really means to me is going through the school system where we were told that our mother tongues would hold us back, and so we were discouraged from speaking them at home. And so many people in my generation have lost their mother tongues now because we were shamed out of it. And there was this implicit understanding that who you are, where you come from, the language you speak is somehow inherently lesser, less evolved, less cultured, lesser. And to assimilate in all of that, it's a difficult thing indeed. It's a difficult thing. And it's very, very strange. And with this film as well, there was something that really, really struck me when he went back home for the first time and he was talking about his name being Zed, and his friend said, that's the name that they gave you. That's not your real name. That's the name that they gave you. And when we start to talk about identity and culture, health was a really interesting character in this movie, because the complete loss of agency that you feel. So I also have an autoimmune condition that affects my muscles. So it's quite grueling to watch this. But the complete loss of agency that you have when it is something, when it manifests as physical and it is outside of your body, it was such a beautiful way to make real and tangible all of the internal struggles and the idea of, in order to get to the truest version of yourself, when all of this conditioning and post-colonial legacy, everything has to be broken apart and completely shattered and obliterated, and you have to lay everything out and have a look at it and see where you are and build up from there. And the moment, I don't know whether I'm spoiling this, but at the end where he just looks straight at the camera, this was a completely visceral experience, this film, truly visceral, and you were on this journey with him, and like you've said, it was so intimate, it was so closed, and it was so intimate, and you felt everything, and the resolution at the end was enough. He wasn't magically, it wasn't a magical fairy tale ending, but it was enough. There was enough of a sense of self. There was enough at the end that you were satisfied, and there was enough of a sense of completion.
Agreed. That is a film that makes us all think, and I love the fact that it did so well and was seen by many. If you haven't seen it, BFI Player is your place. Mogul Mowgli. And Rajinder, before we wrap up, any parting words on this, and this identity, especially Muslims are kind of boxed, and though we don't have a lot of time, would love to hear a few words from you on that.
Yeah, you talked about Riz Ahmed has talked about the Riz Ahmed test, or the need for positive representation, and that's so important. But actually, is this a positive representation of Muslims? No. Is this a complex, layered and realistic representation of Muslims? Yes. And that is a real sense of hope for us, because we get a character who is complex, we get a character who's not sure about his own Muslim identity at times, who goes on his own journey, who is a slightly different to his parents, who loves his parents dearly, who loves them back dearly, but who has some issues with some of his own culture. And I think a lot of us can relate to that, whether we're brown or white. So there's a universal thread, a universal strand within this here. And then there's the music, the rap music, which has been the music of the oppressed, is used to tell interesting stories, is used to punctuate and not just entertain us, but also take us on that journey. And what's really interesting, and this is the final point I think where I'd like to leave it for myself, is this is only possible, this story is only possible, and the cultures are only able to come together in Britain in 2018, 2019, 2020, when the film was conceived of and made. And why? Because Britain is no longer one culture. It never was. It reminds us that Britain is complex, Britain is layered, Britain is from different parts of the world. We are all part of that story, and we are all trying to tell that story, however dark, however problematic, but it's a story that's worth telling. And those kinds of characterizations are complex and layered, and we need more of those British characters, men, women, LGBT, you name it, to come forth and tell their stories.
Well said. I have goosebumps listening to you, Rajinder. Well said. That really does leave us on a beautiful note to celebrate South Asian Heritage Month. This is a month that is, it's very special to many of us from the diaspora, because we've not had anything like this before. And I think we're one of the few countries that is celebrating this. And we have South Asian diaspora in many parts of the world, and I'm sure they'll follow suit. So Natasha, to you and your team, kudos and congratulations for making this happen. We should say a big thank you. Professor Rajinder Dudrah, always doing amazing things with linguistics and with culture. Thank you for being with us at the BFI today. Happy South Asian Heritage Month to everybody. Thank you again, Rajinder and Natasha.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.